Hey guys, Weeby News here, and today we're going to be discussing Danganronpa Distrust. For those of you who don't know what Distrust is, it's the original beta prototype of Danganronpa that was very different from what we ended up with. The atmosphere of the game was much darker, the blood was red, and quite a few of the game mechanics were different as well. Most notably, there was branching paths based on your decisions throughout the playthrough, so your choices could literally determine who lives or dies each chapter. Also, the characters we've come to love in Trigger Happy Havoc had some very different designs too in this game. Many of them went through a lot of changes through the production of it. Unfortunately, it was eventually scrapped for being too gruesome, but eventually many of the elements of the project were redeveloped into Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. I've made some videos in the past discussing the general trivia of Distrust and the characters' beta designs, but in this video, I want to try to piece together the first chapter, all of its roots, and how I think it would work as an actual game based on all the information we know about it. While creating this vague scenario for the first chapter, I'm going to be referencing real unused content from the beta, both story and gameplay mechanics, but I'm also going to try to fill in the gaps with my own ideas. Also, I am using Google Translate for these informational images of Distrust, so obviously it's not going to be perfect. I'm sure the scenario I'm creating isn't going to be 100% accurate, it's just the best I can make based on what I know. Also, some of the images for Distrust can be pretty graphic. I'm going to try to censor them out a little bit so that the video doesn't get age restricted, but I thought it might still be good to put a warning at the beginning of the video, and if you want to see the images without any censoring, I will link them in the description. But yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into the video. The original game proposal for Distrust was 15 teenagers killing time or 7-day survival war. I thought it was interesting that Distrust was meant to take place over just 7 days. That seems way shorter than the length of the official Danganronpa games. Also, unfortunately, it does appear that Makuro doesn't exist in Distrust, since there's only 15 students and there's no Distrust beta designs of her from what I've seen. Although sad, it does make sense considering this game seems to focus more on alternate paths rather than one cohesive main story. Based on this Google translation, the game takes place in an abandoned warehouse that was made to look like a school. It's a closed facility with no windows or doorways. A chime resounds in the facility, as if to add to the confusion of the 15 people. Then an ominous announcement was made. The voice calling states, "I'm going to have everyone take a little test. It's not just a test though." And the rest of it I couldn't figure out. Like in the canon games, Monokuma appears before them after this announcement and explains the rules of the killing game. You're forced to live here forever unless you kill another student and fool your classmates into believing somebody else did it. If the culprit succeeds, they can escape and all the other students die. But if they convict the right culprit, then the culprit is the one who's executed. So these general rules seem to be the same in Distrust as they are in official Danganronpa. The main difference with this part is that at the beginning of Distrust production, Monokuma looked way different. His original name was actually Phantom, and his appearance resembled an anatomy doll that showed visible internal organs. And yes, I know, it is absolute nightmare fuel. Although it was very different from Monokuma's adorable bear form, you can still kind of see the split design that later inspired his current look. Next, I'd like to focus on the location and setting of this killing game. Looking at the images, it appears the designs were heavily inspired by these photographs that were taken at several different abandoned schools in Detroit. When looking at these pictures and comparing them to the living conditions in Trigger Happy Havoc, it's like night and day. To call it a massive downgrade is an understatement. In the canon games, they had amenities like a pool, gym, art room, and unlimited food. This trashed abandoned warehouse doesn't even seem livable in comparison. You can see a snippet of the map in one of these images too, which shows some of the layout of the building. Looking here, you can see the living quarters look a lot smaller. The characters' rooms are literally just a bed, which means they likely had a shared bathroom. Small differences like this, in my opinion, would make it much harder to avoid the group if you want to separate yourself from them, and I feel like it could just cause more tension overall. So I can only imagine how badly they'd want to leave this trashed building where they're practically living on top of each other. I feel like the psychological torture of them thinking they might be locked up here forever could definitely encourage them to kill more quickly. Now, I'd like to get into the details of this game. There's several flowcharts included in these screenshots. The first one I want to focus on is this one, which seems to represent the layout of the entire game. Google couldn't translate the first box, but I assume it probably means prologue, considering the other boxes translate to first, second, and third game. This implies to me that they were planning on making only 3 chapters total for Distrust. Considering how many branching paths there appear to be in this game, it makes a lot of sense that they'd want to make the main structure shorter. This flowchart also mentions that the game has multiple endings depending on who dies or survives. Since the game takes place over the span of 7 days, and there's another chart that outlines the prologue and first chapter, I think we can assume the prologue is the first day, then every chapter after that lasts for about 2 days. It's interesting because hypothetically, if there is one victim and one culprit every chapter, then that means there would be 9 survivors total, which is over half of the original group. I guess there could still be a double kill one chapter, but that would still leave 8 survivors, which is still more than half of the group. I'm guessing the shortness of this game, as well as the possible increase in survivors in the main routes compared to the canon Danganronpa games, is because all the alternate routes take up a lot of space. This game was originally intended to be a PSP game, so I can't imagine they had a lot of game space to work with. Plus, it was going to be a new IP as well, so they probably don't want to spend too much time on it if they didn't know if it was going to succeed. Now I want to take a look at the diagram and flowchart for chapter 1, and I gotta say, the flowchart is super duper interesting. I was really shocked by how many routes there appear to be in just one chapter. But first, I want to talk about this vague diagram that outlines simply how everything goes down in the first chapter. On day 1 is when the killing game starts. Then day 2, someone dies. The person who dies is based on your choices in the game. In this diagram, it uses the examples of characters A and B. In route 1, A dies. In route 2, B dies, and A instead becomes your investigation partner. Another important thing to note is that in this game there's a mechanic called the trust and distrust meter. The way that it worked is that occasionally tough decisions would present themselves, and these would open up branching paths and alternate endings to the story. The choices made would influence the trust/distrust meter, and with the maximum trust level, a character would become your ally during investigations. The level of the meter would also determine which murders occur. It's also interesting to note that this system appeared to be reused later in Zero Escape: Virtue's Last Reward, which is the second game in the Zero Escape trilogy. In that game, there's a short minigame in between rounds where you are paired against another character and you can choose to ally or betray them. The answers you would choose during this section would affect how much certain characters would trust or distrust you. Then depending on whose trust you gain, you're able to finish a route that fleshes out their character. Every non-bad ending is named after a character as well, and that route is the one you learn the most about them on. Since Kodaka and Uchikoshi, the creator of Zero Escape, are friends, some actually believe that Kodaka allowed Uchikoshi to take the trust-distrust system and implement it into this game. I also tend to believe that this could be the case, so I think there's a pretty good chance that the trust/distrust meter worked similarly. I think it's even possible that the main routes in Distrust could have been themed after certain characters, but that's just my speculation. I'm not 100% sure set on that. So in this diagram, they use the examples of characters A and B, but on the same page, there's a very blurry image of the hero's timesheet, and I believe that this is the flowchart for the first chapter that outlines all the possible routes they created for it. So firstly, the top diagram shows that the entirety of chapter 1 in the prologue takes place over the course of 3 days, and it labels exactly what happens each day. The timesheet, aka the flowchart, is split into 3 sections as well. So day 1, day 2, and day 3. I believe the boxes on each day represent different choices you can make during the playthrough. The way I see this first part going down is that after the group receives the speech from Monokuma about the killing game, everyone decides to further explore the building, but they split up. Some of the characters who are totally antisocial, like Tagami and Kyoko, would prefer to explore alone, while other characters like Chihiro or Sayaka would want to travel in a group of at least 2 or more. And so your first big decision of the game is that you can choose who you investigate the school with. And I'm going to say that you have 8 different choices here since there's 8 boxes. Something else you'll notice when you start charting everything out is that for most routes there's boxes present for all 3 days, but there's about 4 routes that seem to end rather abruptly. I'm going to speculate that these routes are the bad ends, where you, the player, aka Naegi, end up getting killed somehow. So I'm thinking that if you choose the wrong person to investigate with, then it could potentially lead to your death. I ended up creating how I theorized the groups would split up and who I think would be responsible for Naigi's bad ends as well. Just a reminder that this whole section is just speculative and for fun. I'm just trying to come up with scenarios based off of this chart. But yeah, I ended up choosing Leon, Mondo, Tagami, and Fukawa for the characters that kill you on these bad ends. If you choose to explore with Mondo, then you'll be on route 2, where it appears that you die in the daytime. The reason I chose him for this route is because he's a very emotional and impulsive character. I'm sure you guys remember how in Trigger Happy Havoc he killed Chihiro just because they said something that triggered his insecurities. And even right after the prologue, he knocks Naegi out just because he was trying to stop him from hitting Tagami. So I could see Naegi saying something that leads him to getting murdered pretty quickly with Mondo, especially since I feel like Mondo would be super on edge after learning they're supposed to be trapped in this seemingly unlivable warehouse. If you choose to explore with Fukawa, then you'll be on route 3, where you appear to die on day 2. I assume if you explore alone with Fukawa, then you're mostly just going to end up stalking Tagami with her the whole time. My idea is that Tagami will notice them tailing him, but won't say anything. Instead, he's going to come up with a plan to kill Naegi that he believes is foolproof. I think he'd target Naegi Naegi over Fukawa since he'd be a less obvious target since Fukawa is so obsessed with him, and also Fukawa would be much easier for Tagami to manipulate to vote in his favor during the trial. Another interesting thing about this route is that there appears to be another branch off too, where you can possibly avoid getting the third bad end. I like to theorize that maybe you see Kyoko walking around while you're exploring with Fukawa, and you get the decision to ditch Fukawa to join Kyoko or to stay with Fukawa, and then if you stay with Fukawa, you end up dying to Tagami, like I stated, and then if you join Kyoko, you end up going towards one of the other routes. If you choose to explore with Tagami, then you'll be on Route 9, where you die in the daytime. My idea is that Fukawa is tailing you both, and she gets overwhelmingly jealous of Naegi hanging around Tagami. Based on her beta designs, it seems like her having Genocider as a split personality was an idea from the very start of development, and although in Trigger Happy Havoc, she only kills men that she's attracted to, I could see her killing anyone and everyone in Distrust, given its darker theme. So I'm gonna say that she kills Naegi in a fit of rage and jealousy. This scenario is pretty memey, but I honestly think it would be hilarious if she kills him after they have like a really cliche like rom-com moment, you know what I mean? Like Naegi trips and just happens to fall on top of Tagami, and like once she sees that, she gets so pissed she just murders Naegi right on the spot. For Route 1, where you die in the evening, I chose Leon as the culprit. He seems like another character that might travel alone, and I was thinking an interesting idea could be Naegi potentially trying to kill him, but then failing. So as they start investigating, Naegi will start to begin ruminating about the killing game. If we want to twist the canon a bit, then I think it'd be really impactful if he had a sense of urgency to leave. For example, like a sick sister or mom that he has to help pay the bills for. So like maybe we see hints of this backstory and his urgency regarding it in other routes too, but in those routes he gets distracted by the other characters or gets killed before he takes action regarding it. In this one though, Leon's just gonna be spending the entire time talking about himself, how amazing he is at everything, how he gets all the girls, how he needs to escape to become a rock star. He's just gonna be bragging and talking about like really first world problems. And to twist the canon again a little bit, I'm just gonna say he's a lot less likable in this version. I mean, look at the way he kills Kyoko in one of these routes. That was way overkill and not needed, Leon. And so I'm gonna make it to where he's just really obnoxious while they're exploring, and Naigi's going to start tuning him out, which leads to him ruminating even more about the killing game and how he needs to escape ASAP. Then, let's say an opportune moment comes up where he could easily kill Leon. So for example, they're in the kitchen and Naigi's next to a knife and Leon's back is turned around. And so he attempts to take Leon's life, but fails. So maybe Leon sees him at the very last second and is able to avoid it, and then he overpowers Naegi and kills him first. I think this could be an interesting twist to add to one of these endings. But yeah, anyways, these are the scenarios I came up for the bad ends. Let me know what you guys think, or if you have any ideas yourself. I'd love to hear them in the comment section below. I love reading like other alternate scenarios for these types of things, so I'd be really interested to see what you guys come up with. Getting back to the game mechanics, there appear to be something similar to the free time events that we see in the official Danganronpa games. You still collect mana coins throughout the school and use them at a gacha machine. There you use them to obtain gifts, character side stories, and special events. It mentions that each side story has past episodes of each character, and that CGs are also included. There's also an attendance book for each character too that appears to be the beta version of the report card. As you unlock more of these events, you fill out more of their character sheets, and their favorability goes up. You also receive skills as their favorability increases, like in the canon games. There's special events you can unlock too, which seems pretty similar to the ones we see in Danganronpa. Once you get the item, you're able to trigger the cutscene. Then there's the high sensitivity gifts. I'm thinking this might be like in the fan game Danganronpa Another, where there's one item that is each character's favorite. Therefore, it unlocks a unique cutscene related to it. There also seemed to be a bonus mode called Behind the Gymnasium, where I assume you could finish everyone's side stories after completing the game. And then, after you successfully get through daily life, this is of course when a murder occurs. And as we've already established, the murder that takes place is based on the decisions you made in daily life. When it comes to the investigation mechanics, they honestly look pretty similar to official Danganronpa. You explore suspicious areas and collect keywords, aka truth bullets, that you can then use to retaliate against statements in the trial. During investigations, you can also use them out to locate other characters and discuss the case with them. Then, after you gain all the truth bullets necessary for the case, you arrive at the trial, which seems to have quite a few different mechanics from the ones we see in official Danganronpa. The first thing that really stood out to me is that based on this image, it appears that there was a pre-trial vote. So basically, before the discussion would even begin, everyone would vote on who they suspected the most, and you would get to see the top 3 most voted for characters. After this, the students would engage in the discussion part of the trial, which I assume includes all the mini games. Then, depending on on how the discussion progresses, the votes for each character would change. You see it represented in this chart that has a picture of each character with a red bar next to them. I'm assuming the larger the bar, the more votes against them. There also appears to be a trust/distrust meter that is present during the trial that represents how much the classmates trust you or not. This seemed to be an early prototype of the influence gauge, and likely wherever you ended up on this meter determines whether you get a good ending or a bad one. Several of the minigames in the trial seem pretty different as well. One minigame that was scrapped is referred to as Nico Video Mode, and it's based on the online video service Nico Nico. On that website, when people type and send comments, they fly across the screen of the video, and other people who are watching can break them. Based on this screenshot, it looks pretty similar to that. Like everybody's comments are flying across the screen at once, and it's up to you to find the target, aka issue, and break it. Compared to all the minigames that do show up in canon Danganronpa, it seems the most similar to Mass Panic Debate in V3, so I'm kind of wondering if this could have been the inspiration behind it. Then next, there is Initiative Time. During a real-time countdown, talk to as many people as possible to gather information. I'm guessing that during this section, if you select people who have relevant information to the case, then that will raise the group's trust, while if you select people that don't know anything, then that will lower it. Then there's Climax Reasoning, which if it sounds familiar to you, then you're right, because although it wasn't a minigame in canon Danganronpa, it is the name of one of the most iconic music tracks from the game. As for the minigame in Distrust, it's one where a cornered opponent asks multiple questions at once, and your goal is to answer them all. Out of all the canon Danganronpa minigames, this seems the most like Rebuttal Showdown to me, which didn't appear until Danganronpa 2, since that one was also a one-on-one debate where you had to refute the opponent's contradictions. This, in my opinion, seems like a more stripped down and less stylistic version of Rebuttal Showdown. Otherwise, there's several minigames in Distrust that did make it to trigger Happy Havoc, but were adjusted a bit. For example, Non-Stop Debate is still present, but weak points appear in dialogue boxes instead of the floating text that you see in Trigger Happy Havoc. There's also Machine Gun Talk Battle that appears to be the prototype of Bullet Time Battle. It's still a rhythm game, but this one features bullets with trial information that needs to be selected with the correct timing. After the trial is concluded, everyone places their vote, and just like in the pre-trial voting, you get to see the top 3 most voted for characters. Of course, only first place is the one who's executed, but I think showing the top 3 is still pretty interesting, since I feel like the people included in the second and third spot would probably be pretty upset that they were almost voted the culprit. I feel like this could definitely contribute to rising tensions in the next chapter too. And finally, I want to talk about my theories regarding the full roots of this chapter. In this section, I'm going to be telling you guys who I think the culprit was for each chapter based on the information shown. I won't be making a full scenario for these roots in this video, but if you guys are interested in that, please do let me know, and I can make a sequel to this video where I go into depth explaining how I think each trial went down. But yeah, looking at the chart, you can see that there's 6 boxes in the day 3 square, which is when the trial is supposed to take place. So to me, this implies that there's 6 different routes that have different combinations of victims and culprits. I could see people trying to argue that there's only 3 full routes, and that they're these 3 that make it all the way to the edge of the chart, and that these other 3 are just bad ends that you get in the trial. But I'm leaning towards there being 6 routes, just because I found pretty significant evidence, in my opinion, that prove at least 5 different characters were planned to be a culprit at one point. The first route is one where Leon kills Kyoko by stabbing her to death. Quite a lot, I might add. It looks like she's been pierced by at least 3 different spears. And something that I do find interesting is how her death looks kind of similar to Makuro's in Trigger Happy Havoc, since they were both impaled with spears. With this route, there's actually footage of the body discovery announcement, part of the trial, and execution. It's probably the most famous thing from Distrust, honestly. Leon, who was named Kazuo Matsuzaki at the time, was executed in an almost identical way to how Leon was in Trigger Happy Havoc. The main differences are the red blood, name changes, art style, and character designs. The second route with the most evidence is the one where Junko is the culprit. The execution is so small and short that it's honestly a little hard to tell that it's her. I've also seen some people say that they thought this was Kyoko instead, so I decided to double check by locating where every character was on the selection menu, and it does in fact appear to be Junko. In this execution, we see her get beheaded by a guillotine, while the others watch along creepily. This one is obviously a lot less detailed and fleshed out than Leon's. This game was a work in progress, so I think that in the first version of Distrust, all the executions were meant to be done in this simplistic comic book fashion. That way they could create all these alternate routes more easily, but as they kept bringing the game to supervisors and getting more notes, they probably added more to flesh out the executions until it eventually became what we see in Leon's beta execution. At that point in production, I feel like they were probably already getting pretty close to Danganronpa's final form, which is why I doubt that there's an animated execution for Junko or any of the other alternate culprits, but I just want to get that out of the way. As for her victim, I tend to think it was also Kyoko. There's this one image that shows Beta Kyoko's head and hand dismembered and found inside a box. I tend to speculate that Junko was the one to commit this, since her execution parallels it, with her dying to a guillotine. And of course, as we all know, Monokuma likes to make the executions ironic. Next, I also believe that Chihiro was a culprit in one of these routes. And I know what you're thinking, how dare you, weeby? But just hear me out first. So first, there's the screen cap where Chihiro states, "I didn't do it, it's true, believe me." So they were at least accused of murder at one point. Next to this image, there's a screenshot of Chihiro on the ground while Monokuma waves a knife over them. If you compare the art style of this image to Junko's comic strip execution, it looks very similar. The only colors used are red, black, and white, and there's these creepy eyes staring at them in both. In Junko, it's the onlookers, and in Chihiro's, it's this creepy sun portrait. So this leads me to believe that this image could be a part of Beta Chihiro's execution comic strip. Then also next to these images, there's a CG of Robo Justice. I'm thinking that maybe Chihiro used that in their murder somehow. Maybe they used it so that they could overpower the other students, since they are pretty weak normally. Then for the other culprit, I'm thinking it's Sayaka, and that she murdered Leon, mostly because there's the CG that shows Sayaka murdering Leon straight up. So that one's pretty straightforward. Then the next character I think was a culprit at one point is Hifumi. Among these images, there's screenshots of Naegi arguing with Hifumi during a trial. Naegi states that the culprit left a clue, and in response, Hifumi says something along the lines of, "He found out, I have to kill him." So yeah, based on that line, it definitely does seem like he was planned to be a culprit at one point. Then the final character I think was potentially a culprit is Kyoko. The reason I think this is because in the screenshots of Machine Gun Talk Battle, you're playing against her and her statement translates to, "I killed, do you have a foundation?" To me, it reminds me of when you're playing the rhythm games against the culprits in the Kid and Danganronpa games, and they're like, "Oh, you're saying I did it? Where's the proof?" This line seems pretty damning if you think about it in that context, especially since you usually play that game against the culprit. But I am overall a bit more iffy on this one, since it's possible that she's being wrongly accused here. But yeah, I'm curious to know what you guys think. Anyways, this will conclude the video. This is my full labeling of the Distrust timesheet / flowchart, if you guys want to take a closer look at it. Again, this is all just my speculation, based on the information I know about Distrust from articles and Google translations. So yeah, it's not 100% accurate at all, just kind of the way I interpreted it when I was looking at it. Let me know if you agree or disagree with how I interpreted it, and also if you happen to know Japanese and can correct any of the translations in the comments, that would be very much appreciated. I'd be happy to pin your comments. Also, let me know if you guys do want a sequel where I create scenarios for the alleged culprits. I think that would be a super fun idea. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please do leave a like and a comment and subscribe if you did. But yeah, thanks guys for watching. I really do appreciate you, and I will see you real soon.